well as to the graduate students of the other member universities of the Science Consortium. Our professor is actually a visiting professor under the program of the National Science Consortium under the Science Education Institute. So he will be here for 3 weeks. But at the same time, he was also conferred as the honorary professor of the university last Monday, despite the suspension of classes we went through with the honorary professor conferment. Thank you for the support of the students who were living around, as well as the faculty members who have their cars to come here. So anyway, and this is part of the activities that we propose to SEI under that visiting professor program for him to offer a graduate course. Natural products research is one of the trusts of the university, and that's the reason we try to bring in experts in that area. I don't have your CV, but I think you can just check on the CV of Professor Cordell. If you go to the website of the university, go to honorary professors, you will see the CV. Yes, that is brief, although I wouldn't say that that's really brief. But I came to know Professor Cordell, must be 25 years ago, I believe, or more than that. When I was a student like you, I was doing my Ph.D. His book is like my Bible. What book is that? My Bible.
That's just about the Bible.
So,
In the beginning.
Yes. No, because I did work on the alkaloids of Philippine plants, and pandan is
Introduction to
part of that.
alkaloids.
Yeah, it's introduction
approach.
to alkaloids biosynthetic approach. So that has been my reference over the years that I've been doing my study, because, as I said, the focus of the work is really on alkaloids on Philippine plants. But I did the work in Australia, and that's why I came to know the book and the author. And to my surprise, I met the author here in the Philippines when I presented my work at the Asian Symposium on Medicinal Plants 25 years ago at UP Diliman. I was presenting my work, and here comes a person asking questions about me, my presentation, and that's him. So that's the start of the friendship that we had over the years. And he was talking yesterday about mentoring. I had several mentors with regards to my positions in my administrative positions. I'm, of course, Professor Sibilia, Professor Guevara, and he is also one of those. So usually, if I cannot make any decisions to some things, I would send an email, ask him, because of his many administrative posts also that he had assumed at the University of Chicago. And it was great. And I'm very grateful for all the advices that he had given me in how I would manage my office, and how, of course, also in the research direction of the university. And that's the reason I think it's about time. That's why we recommended him to be conferred the honorary professor of the university. So we offer this course as part of his responsibility as an honorary professor. He has been asking me, what are my responsibilities as an honorary professor? I told him, there's really nothing listed in the document of the university, but I believe this would be one that, you know, the students will benefit a lot from that lecture. We seldom bring in foreign faculty or foreign experts to talk about the area of natural products. So that's why we have really been convincing people to come. Of course, other than the book that I have read, there are other books that came out after that. So I hope that you will learn. I'm sure I'm sure you will learn a lot from all the lectures, 8 sessions that he will be giving. As I mentioned, for the students who want credit, the course will be offered in summer. Mario Tan, yes, you just have to indicate that will be a period. So there won't be any assessment or exam during these 8 sessions. But then the exams will be given in summer. So you have enough time to study, how many months to study. So I don't know what type of exam he will give, but I will only be implementing the exams for for you to get the 3 units credit for your graduate program. So for you who, so you just have to list your name with Mario Tango, so that the Dean of the Graduate School would know how many will be taking the course. Okay? So I will not take much of his time, otherwise I will be probably talking an hour. So I'll give you Professor Geoffrey Cordell to give this lecture already.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Maribel, for that nice introduction. I greatly appreciate it. I don't know how many of you were at my lecture yesterday, or the lecture on the previous day for the Honorary Professor. Certainly based on the Honorary Professor lecture, there might be a little bit of overlap. But it'll be a lot expanded. All right, so we do have a few ground rules and things. Let me just set this up. I do that, and then do this. It should work. Whoops, we lost one. Okay, so we can. Oops, sorry. Sorry. Still learning these simple techniques. Okay, so this is basically a summary. It's kind of an eclectic course. But let me just make sure this unravels, because I tend to wander around. I don't like to be stuck. One of the ground rules is that this is informal. Okay, it's not. I mean, it looks formal, okay, but it's actually informal in the sense that I'm going to be covering a lot of material that will be new to you, that might not be what you would call hard science. It's going to be philosophy, it's going to be approach, it's going to be thinking. If there's something that you don't understand and it's a burning issue, don't think that it's a silly question that you're going to ask, because probably the person next to you or somewhere else in the room wants to ask the same question. So feel free to put up your hand and say, you know, I don't understand what you just said, or can you go over that again? Because this is not about me, all right? This is about you. It's about the opportunity that you have to get some, what I would like to think is a broader experience than probably you've ever had to natural products. Some very different perspectives. And we're going to see that in a number of different aspects of this program that I've put together. So this is like an assembly of some hot topics. Hot topics to me, they're not necessarily the hottest topics in natural products. There's plenty of other things that we could be talking about. But this gives you a little bit of an idea of the breakdown of what we're going to do. We're going to spend probably around 8 hours talking about ecopharmacology and what on earth that is, and development of traditional medicines, foods and cosmetics. And you may say, well, why are foods and cosmetics in there as well? And you'll see that some of the same principles that apply to traditional medicines and the development are applying now to cosmetics, because there are obviously issues that relate to functional foods. There are obviously issues that relate to cosmeceuticals, right? In other words, those cosmetic products that will in fact benefit health, okay? In various ways. We're going to look at a little bit at the discovery of medicinal agents from natural sources. I'm not going to go into great detail there, because part of that is going to come up within the first series of lectures. We're going to look at the paradox of alkaloids. I've spent a lot of time over the years working on alkaloids. This is probably, if I think about it, this is probably 50 years of working on alkaloids. I first started working on alkaloids when I was an undergraduate, and I was doing an undergraduate kind of research project for a professor at the University of Manchester, and he said to me, I'd like you to try to synthesize this alkaloid. It's a very, very simple alkaloid. It's called damascene, and but it was a crazy synthesis. How many of you here are in organic chemistry and know a little bit about organic synthesis? Okay, so I'm not going to tell that story. Okay, one. Okay, so Maribel, this is for your benefit. No. If you've never worked with potassium permanganate, it's this real purple stuff. So the deal was to take a compound called 8-hydroxyquinoline, all right, and to heat it up with potassium permanganate and try to isolate something from this, and it was ridiculous. Anyway, so that was my start, and it was a failure. So that was a good omen. That was a good omen because it's in a way it's good to start with a failure because there is this kind of myth in science, and it's a very popular myth that you find kind of outside in the lay community that science works, and science doesn't always work. Right? You do an experiment and it doesn't work, and so you have that reality check all the time of okay, now what do I do? It didn't work. I didn't get the thing to do what I thought it might do. Whether that's a biological response or a chemical reaction or whatever it is. An enzyme doesn't work, or blah, blah, blah. So anyway, back to alcohols. So then I worked on that for my Ph.D. and when I went to MIT as a postdoc for a couple of years, I worked on alkaloid synthesis there. Then when I went to University of Illinois, I worked on alkaloids there, and then we expanded that into many, many, many other kinds of natural products. But I was editor of a book series called The Alkaloids. I edited about, 29 volumes in that series. The ironic thing is that a few years ago, I kind of naively decided, okay, I'd like to write a book. I'm retired and got nothing else to do except, watch football on TV. So I thought, okay, I'll write a book on the biosynthesis of alkaloids. And I got to start writing. Yeah, come on in, don't be shy. I got to start writing this book, and one of the first things that happened was I realized I didn't know very much. That I'd worked in this field for many, many years, and that what I knew was probably about, 20% of what this book was. And I'm still working on this book, and I'm still adding new groups of alkaloids, where the biosynthesis has been studied, obviously now on the genome level. And so I'm learning about that. We're going to talk about biosynthesis of natural products. This is going to be like a brief overview of all of the various classes of natural products. Not going to be in any great detail, but we'll go through things, and we'll talk a little bit about not just biosynthesis, but also about the function, why they're important. And that will include not just plant-based natural products, but it will include a few of the microbial ones. And then we're going to talk about natural products and their future in healthcare. So part of that will kind of come back full circle to how we're going to start. Yes, I'm not being your way here. That's all right. You don't have to apologize to me. So we're going to come back full circle in a way that you'll hopefully get at the end. All right. So, are there any questions at this point? No? Okay. All right. So, oops! I just clicked the wrong button again. I keep doing that. I'm so sorry. Okay. What on earth is going on? It keeps. I click the button, but it jumps out of the format. Why does it do that? So the first part is going to be on ecopharmacology, which you don't know what that is yet, but we're going to explain. And development of foods and nutrition medicine. Now, some of this has been published. And there's a few citations in there. What I'm hoping to do is to make those publications available as background material for you. We're going to figure out a way to do that. Because I've been writing a lot about this as the ideas have continued. Oh my God! It doesn't want to move.
It's going back to not that as a slideshow.
It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't want to stay in that mode. Okay. Okay. So here's a little bit of the lecture. A little bit of the lecture outline. This doesn't want to stay. It doesn't want to stay in that format. Sorry?
Yeah, try that one.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
That is the fourth already.
It jumps out of the. Okay. Let's not get all confused. Let's take this one out. Okay, that's the way you say it. There it is. There it is. Okay. So, let's see what we've got here. Let's start top left. Top left is a sculptor. Sculpture. Let's get it right. Sorry. Sculpture. And it's called The Bean, officially called Cloud 9. It's on the shore of Chicago, right, on Lake Michigan. Chicago's a very beautiful city. I've lived there for many years when I'm not traveling around. And as I was saying yesterday in the lecture, that one of the things about this bean is that it's very carefully finished. Very carefully finished. It's steel. It's a big hollow steel beam, as it were, shape. You can't see the whole thing from this perspective, but it gives a beautiful view of the skyline of Chicago. And as I was saying, it reflects care. Of care of getting things right, of getting things precise, and that's what science is about. So I use that kind of as a symbol for that. Down on the bottom left, some of you may be familiar with Doctor Who, TV series. I first started watching that when I was an undergraduate, so that's a long time ago. But it's a very important device because it moves us through time and space. Okay? TARDIS is time and relative dimensions in space. And that's what we're going to be doing here a little bit this morning. Okay, and tomorrow. The scene from Marrakesh is important. It's important because you need to be aware that what you see in terms of natural products, or what you see in terms of traditional medicine in this country, in this environment, has some similarities and some distinct differences with what goes on in the rest of the world. One of the aspects it's important to realize is that somewhere around 64% of the people in the world are using traditional medicines on a daily basis in terms of their primary health care, mostly because they don't have access to other resources. So a few years ago, I started to think in terms of sustainability issues here, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about what are some of the contemporary issues in developing natural products, particularly traditional medicines. We're going to talk about the impact of globalization, which of course is a hot topic in many different perspectives now, and certainly in terms of traditional medicine, that's one of them. We're going to do a little bit of myth busting, okay, because there's a bunch of myths. You may not realize it, but you hold in your brains a number of myths that are associated with natural products. So, as I said the other day, one of the goals of these lectures is to move you your heart, to move your mind. And we're going to be moving you from this place where you are at the moment. You don't know that you're stuck, but you are stuck, right? And we're going to be moving you over here. And maybe if you're really lucky, we'll move you over here. All right, we'll see how far we can travel together. We're going to look at the issue of what's in the name. All right, we won't be doing this today, but we'll be doing it maybe a day or so. And then developing the evidence. We need to take a step back. One of the steps back. And one of the steps back is to look at the resources that we use. And the United States, of course, is really horrible in that regard, and China is catching up with being just as horrible as the United States. So if the world used resources the way the US does, we'd need the resources of 4 more worlds. You may have seen last week that there was a report of this star with some, I don't know how many light years away from here, which had 7 planets that were similar to Earth, right? So what's the science behind that? Okay? I mean, to me, I'm just a naive old man, to me, it's ridiculous. Why is it ridiculous? So if you think in terms of, how many of you here are biologists? All right? So do a little Google sometime and ask the question of what's the effect of gravity on biology, on evolutionary biology, for example. Okay, what's that likely effect? Because here you've got, you know, Earth-like planets spinning on their axis within about a day and a half. All right? If you saw the 7 planets story, you needed to go a little bit deeper and look at the rate of rotation. And there wasn't one that had a rate of rotation that was more than about 12 days. So we're at 365 days. Now, anybody who knows anything about centrifugal forces knows that something is going to change as soon as you change the pull of gravity. Thank you very much. Okay, so you know, that's not going to work. We're not going to be moving to any of those planets. And that's important. That's critically important. Okay. On the other hand, we also need 4 more suns. You say, well, what's going on here? This is a real photo. Okay? This is my photo. I took this. This is not photoshopped. This is not photoshopped. Right? So what you see here is the sun, and the sun, and actually there's another one in here. So we've only got 3 additional suns. This was actually taken early morning in Nanjing in China from my hotel room. And the reason why it looks like that is because it was a double-glazed window. And it literally, it existed for just about 2 minutes. And then disappeared as you got the reflection going backwards and forwards from the glass. So this is Wuxi Lake, beautiful Wuxi Lake, right opposite the hotel. I used to walk around here all the time. But it's kind of cool. Anyway, but obviously this is ridiculous, right? So what does it mean for us? Well, Millennium Ecosystem Assessment came out in 2005, and it was a little bit late, but anyway. One of the issues that was raised in that assessment, and one of the statements was, the ability of ecosystems to sustain future generations can no longer be taken for granted. Okay, so this is a very, very important concept. In other words, we can't just assume that whatever is out there now is going to be there for us in the future. That in fact, action is needed. Some consideration, some evolutionary thought process is going to have to occur for us to keep moving forward here. Let me just point this one out to you. Okay, anybody know what that is? What that photo is of? I'll give you a clue. It's from Beijing. That's right. That's right. That's right. So this was from Guang'anmen Hospital in Beijing. from just one of the clinics there. It's a place which this particular clinic dealt with about 8,000 patients a day. It was open 24 hours. And so each one of these trays, if you're not familiar, each one of these trays represents a prescription. All right, and you'll see more of this later. So the prescriptions are coming from the plant materials in these boxes and these drawers behind it. All right, and then they're put together, and then we'll see the process for this later on. So everything is just piled up. So if you think about this, right, you think about this in terms of an ongoing process and increasing numbers of people. One of the questions that you have to have is, well, where are those plants coming from? Right? Because that is the fundamental aspect of the healthcare that we're dealing with here. Right? London in 2012, there was a Planet Under Pressure conference, and out of that came what's called the State of the Planet Declaration. And one of the statements was that the continuing function of Earth's system, as it has supported the well-being of human civilization, is at risk. And it warns of a humanitarian emergency on a global scale. Another aspect that came out of this was the development of what's called a societal contract that was proposed to encompass global sustainability analyses based in science. In other words, what is going on in your country with respect to the sustainability of resources that you need on an ongoing basis? Looking at integrated international solutions-oriented research implemented involving government, society, scientists and the private sector. In other words, what it's saying is that it's not the responsibility of the scientists, it's not the responsibility of government or industry, it's the responsibility of everybody working together. And how do you bring people together in order to make that focus? And that's a challenge for every country in the world now. And it also encouraged and enhanced dialogue on issues of global sustainability. And of course that's been an ongoing process. And you know, there's meetings fairly regularly about some of those issues. The problem is that people have meetings. The issue is, what's the outcome? And who's acting as a result of those meetings? Last year, I'm giving you kind of an overview, a bunch of stuff. And again, this is online. You can take a look at this. It's called the Rockefeller Foundation Lancet. Lancet, of course, is based on the medical journal. Lancet Commission on Planetary Health. And this just gives you an example, you can see it on their website, of various charts and issues that they developed. I'm not going to go through all of those. However, one of the statements again is, we've mortgaged the health of future generations to realize economic and development gains in the present. You've done that as a country. Most countries in the world have done that. Right? You're not exceptional in that regard. We'll see some examples just a bit later on. But as a result, they said societies must address the drivers of environmental change by promoting sustainable and equitable patterns of consumption, reducing population growth, and harnessing the power of technology for change. So those are some of the things that we're going to use as backgrounds to our discussion. Okay? So rather than seeing natural products in isolation, sorry about the pun, but in isolation just as one niche, we have to see it in terms of global effect. All right? Global effect. So sustainability is a journey. It's not a destination. We're all on this journey. You, the people who come after you, and hopefully the people who come after them, right? Because we are already well past what's called the tipping point. The tipping point was the point, probably when population of Earth was somewhere around 5.5 to 6 billion people, where it was viewed that there was enough resources in the world to be able to sustain that population. We've gone past that now. We're at around 7.44 billion people. Right? So we're already past that point. So in other words, we have to take measures in order to sustain our programs. So it's the economic and scientific ethos that harnesses human creativity. That's very important. In other words, it's a creative opportunity. Sustainability and addressing issues of sustainability is a creative opportunity because it allows us to think, what is it that we can be doing to change the way we do things? And we'll come back to that a little bit later on. It is the fabric and foundation of contemporary society. We have to think in those terms. We can't keep on using the resources that we have in the way that we're doing them at the moment. It is not going to work. So Frank and Ernest go to the priest, and they say, when you say the meek will inherit the earth, do you mean as is? So what is it that you're inheriting from my generation? Right? Well, what is it that your heirs, your sons and your daughters and your grandsons and your granddaughters, what is it that they're going to be inheriting? Right? Whatever it is, it's as is. But the reality is that this is it, folks. We don't have those 4 suns. We don't have those 4 other Earths. Right? There is no plan or planet B. Which gets us to global health. What is global health? So global health, there are 2 aspects to it. One is, of course, is the health of the people, and the other is the fact that healthy people require a healthy earth. How many of you have ever heard of the Gaia hypothesis? Do you learn about that in biology here? Yes? James Lovelock, my dear, going back to 1979. This notion, which is a very living notion, it's the notion that you can't separate who we are as human beings from our impact and our interactions with the biology, the organism that is Earth. Okay, and we're going to keep coming back to that issue. One of the first aspects of global health is that the access to healthcare is a human right. It's in the United Nations, not the United Nations, it's in the World Health Organization Charter of 1946. It's also true that a healthy people require a healthy earth. In other words, if you have an unhealthy earth for whatever reason, right, and there's plenty of poor health in the earth itself, then you're not going to have a healthy people, and it's only when you have a healthy people that you have a productive society. Right? So it's all intertwined. You can't separate this. If people are not living in a healthy environment and are themselves sick, it's not a reasonable expectation that they will in fact be productive. Right? They're not going to be contributing to society in a productive manner. So, global use of plants and plant products. This is a little bit what I talked about the other day here. We sometimes forget our relationship to nature. We just kind of take it for granted. We're not truly very grateful for it on a day-to-day basis. So if you look around this room and you think about maybe what you had for breakfast this morning or what you're going to have for lunch, blah, blah, blah. You don't eat synthetic food, right? Okay, this is wood. Right? Even the metal came from nature. And it came from an ore, a mineral ore. So some of the things that we use plants for, of course, are foodstuffs, utensils, handicrafts, construction, flavoring agents and spices. You know, as soon as you start to, make a curry or use a hot sauce or anything like that. The perfumes and cosmetics that many of you wear, whether you're men or whether you're women. Prescription and OTC pharmaceuticals. Plant materials that are used in global commerce as traditional medicinal agents, or some people will call them phytotherapeuticals or dietary supplements or whatever. And also weapons and poisons. I forgot to mention this the other day, but that's a very important aspect too. And obviously there are some drugs, important drugs that have come out of that process. The little picture on the bottom there actually relates to tuberculare, which is used still in surgery as a muscle relaxer. So what are some of the challenges for medicines in global healthcare? We do have this population, as I said, 7.44 billion people today. In a few years it's going to be 10 billion. By 2040, that's roughly a 40% increase. And that's not within my lifetime. Well, it's unlikely to be within my lifetime. But it will be within yours. Hopefully everybody in this room will live to 2040. We already know about tropical deforestation. We're going to see some examples of that. We've got increasing fossil fuel use. If you talk to your parents or your grandparents about traffic in Manila, you'll get an idea of the increase in fossil fuel use there. And of course the impact on climate change, which some people think is real and some people think is a Chinese hoax. That tells you my political persuasion here. But anyway, whatever. Don't get me started. It troubles my stomach when I talk about him. So we've also got new deadly and untreatable global diseases. And I mention these because these are the ones that have come up in the last 15, 20 years. You know, SARS and avian flu, H1N1, etc., etc. We don't know what's coming up next. Right? However, we're going to have to respond. We're going to have to respond. We're going to have to find a way to respond. Okay? So that those are, and they're still, to a certain extent, existing challenges because there aren't any particular solutions to these. And every now and again they pop up. Avian flu pops up somewhere in the world and becomes a problem, a local problem, or sometimes because of transportation now it becomes a bit of a global problem. Oops, sorry. We've got increasing drug resistance. And we're going to mention that again in just a moment. So I'm not going to dwell on it here, but certainly as far as cancer is concerned, malaria, AIDS, MRSA, etc., etc. Yeah. Anyway. I've also got this issue of drugs for the north, drugs for the south. Anybody know what that means? Do you know what, when people say drugs for the north, do you know what the north and the south are? Are you familiar with that concept? It's an economic concept, it's not a directional concept actually. The north is regarded as the developed world, and the south is regarded as the emerging world, or whatever phrase you want to use. And of course, most of the world lives in the south. Most of the world lives in the emerging world, and so that's been a major concern of mine. And as a result of that, there is what's called the Great Healthcare Gap. Having grown up in London, one of the issues that London is kind of famous for is its subway system. It's called the Tube. All right, if you've ever been there, I hope you have. But on the platform, every platform you see there, you'll see Mind the Gap. Mind the Gap. So mind, in English, has a couple of different meanings. Right? Mind means beware of. Right? That's what that means. Beware of the gap, so that you don't fall down. But mind also has the meaning of look after, take care of. Right? So one of the concepts that I have written about here is mind the gap in terms of how do we take care of that gap? How do we begin to think about bridging that gap? All right? Between the north and the south with respect to medicines. Because there's a huge gap there. And if you go back to the notion of global health, the global health aspect is everybody should have the same access to healthcare system. Some more challenges. So bringing a prescription drug to market probably costs, it might even cost a little bit more than that now, 1.6 billion US dollars. It's probably a little more. It's probably more like 1.8 billion dollars. So there are actually very, very few countries in the world that have the resources to be able to develop a drug. And there's this kind of, and I have to use this word, there's this kind of naive expectation in many countries around the world, and I visit a lot of countries in the course of the year. There's this kind of naive expectation that the government is going to sponsor research to develop a drug that will be a prescription product. It's the pharmaceutical companies who do that, and they invest huge, huge amounts of money to be able to do that. And the rate of failure is enormous, and we'll see that in the drug development lectures. Everything that goes into a clinical trial is not a success. And as soon as you've got a failure, you've lost that money. All right? You've lost that money. You've lost that opportunity. So there's a lot of drugs out there that are just sitting on a shelf doing nothing. All right? Because they have failed at what's called late-stage development. Well, what that means is that drugs typically now are too expensive. So your country, as most countries around the world have, is what's called a formulary. You have a formulary of what the government can afford, what they can bring in as a drug. And many, many, many drugs are way too expensive to be brought in. And we'll see some numbers on this a little bit later on. So it's a problem for governments, it's a problem for insurance companies, because if you have health insurance, they're the ones who, you know, you're going to co-pay for it. You know, you'll pay some, and the insurance company pays some, and of course it becomes very expensive for patients. You know, there are drugs on the market now where it costs $250,000 a year for a treatment, a year's treatment for a drug. $250,000 US. We've also got the corollary of all of this, which we're going to see a bit later on, is that there are no medicines for certain local and global diseases or healthcare outcomes, such as obesity is one, but if you look at things like dengue fever or Chagas disease or some of these other tropical diseases, schistosomiasis, etc. We also cannot provide the world with synthetic drugs. You need to be very, very clear on this. So, what do you think is the #1 drug in the world as far as volume is concerned? What do you think that is? Aspirin. What? Aspirin. Just in the US, and of course the use is going to rise this year now. If you think about it in terms of headache, it's about 20 billion aspirin that are used in the US alone. Right? Unbelievable numbers of aspirin. Of course, aspirin is a natural product. You might realize that. It's originally a natural product, originally traditional medicine. But we can't even deliver aspirin to the world. Right? Not everybody in the world has access to aspirin, even as a simple pain reliever. Right? So this idea that we can somehow distribute medicines to the rest of the world that are going to be effective is a complete myth. Right? That's not going to happen. It's not sustainable. Right? We don't have the resources for that. We don't have the synthetic capacity to be able to do that. And there's no real intention there. And we'll talk about intention a little later on. Okay, so one of the questions that I've had for many, many years is, can we provide safe and effective traditional medicines or discover drugs locally? Which is fine to do. It's fine to do that. One issue is who pays, which takes money, and what's the intention behind it. Intention meaning, in this context, priority. Where are you going to put your money? towards what effort in terms of a disease? What's a priority disease? What would, if I asked you today, what would you, and you put up a list on the board here, what would be your top diseases? Now, the caveat to that is, don't think cancer, all right? Don't think heart disease, all right? Think of diseases that for which there are no drugs, typically no drugs, or very limited drugs, or very toxic drugs. Director General of WHO, Dr. Margaret Chan, said a few years ago that drug resistance to antibiotics could be the end of modern medicine as we know it. What did she mean by that statement? Anyone like to take a shot at that one? What did she mean by that? The end of modern medicine as we know it. That's a very, very profound statement from someone who, in terms of global leadership, would be the leading physician in the world. Right? Head of WHO. United Nations body. What does she mean by that? What's the fundamental concept when you take a drug?
Treatment.
Sorry?
Treatment.
Treatment. But it's going to work, right? You're going to be healed. Okay? So what she's saying here is that with respect to antibiotics, you're going to lose that. And for many people who've been dying in the last few years of Versa and MRSA, they have lost that. They've come to the end of the line of the antibiotics. You know, probably one of the most sophisticated ones would be vancomycin. So once you're at vancomycin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, there ain't any more antibiotics, folks. You just came to the end of the line. That's what she's saying. Right? So this notion that in fact there is an antibiotic to heal whatever it is that you have is gone. Right? And it's only going to get worse. So you might think, and we'll talk about this in terms of drug discovery, you might think that that would be a priority, right? In terms of global health, in terms of healing. Do you think there's any pharmaceutical companies that are working in a major way on antibiotics anymore? No. Do you think they're working on drug-resistant antibiotics? No. Then you have to think why. Why would that be a scientific gap for pharmaceutical companies? So I'm not going to give you the answer today. Oh, that's like a little bit of homework for you. You can think about that. Right? And one of the things you might want to Google, okay, to give you a clue, right, is to go and ask the question: what are the drug discovery priorities for a major pharmaceutical company these days? Right? And then think why. Okay? See what we come up with. A little bit of homework. Okay. UK Chief Medical Officer. So she's in charge of medicine in my former country. She says, this was 2013 at a meeting in London. Antimicrobial resistance poses a catastrophic threat. That's harsh language. When you talk catastrophic, right? Catastrophic threat. If we don't act now, any one of us could die because of an ordinary infection that can't be treated by antibiotics. Okay? So what's this great healthcare gap? Total per capita expenditures on healthcare, according to WHO in 2014. US, $9,403 per person. Japan, $2,700. Malaysia, $1,000. Philippines, $329. So you're about in the middle. There's lots of countries below you. But you're roughly on the same parallel with Indonesia. But look at this. Less developed countries account for 56% of the global disease burden. but less than 2% of global health spending. Well, that's where the gap is. One of the gaps. There's many, that's one of them. One of the ironies here is that we've got highly regulated prescription products in the north. Right? That's one of the reasons why it costs this $1.6, $1.8 billion, because you have to meet these very, very high-level regulatory requirements in order to get a drug approved by the Food and Drug Administration. Whereas in the rest of the world, you've got all these unregulated traditional medicines. There are very few countries in the world which have tight traditional medicine regulations to get a product out on the market. This is like a super burning issue for me. A super burning issue, because there's a nonsense part of this. And we're going to get, in some of the lectures a little bit later on, we're going to get into the nonsense of Alice in Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland and natural products have this very, very close relationship. You're going to see that. It's quite incredible. But let me give you an example. So, I don't know how it is here, but when you see an advertisement for a prescription product on the TV in the United States, maybe a 30-second ad, or you see an ad in a magazine for a prescription product. Let's go to the TV. So it's a 30-second ad. So the first 10 seconds is about all the good stuff, all right, that can go on. All right, you can get better in this way, that way, or you're going to feel superhuman, and blah, 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 blah. The next 20 seconds is about, well, don't take this if you're pregnant, don't take this if you have this disease, if you see this happening, if your hair falls out, or if you've got stomach pains, or you've got aches and pains here, or blah, 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 you've got all these problems arising, then stop taking this and go and see your physician. However, there's that same group of people, when they say, we don't want medicinal agents coming from traditional medicines because they've got these side effects, and I'm thinking to myself, do you think that you've got drugs on the market that don't have side effects? Do you know why we have side effects? How many of you here know a little bit about, I'm going to put this temperature up a little bit, because I think people are cold. Okay, so I'm driving. I'm going to put it up to there. Okay. So, do you know why we have the side effects? How many of you here know about network pharmacology? Anybody? Does that come up as an issue for you in pharmacy, for example, or in biology? Network pharmacology, do you know what that is? Okay, good. All right. I mean, good, not good, but good in the sense that we'll talk about it a little bit. That's one of the core issues that we're going to come to. Because, to be honest with you, this is not. We're going to talk a lot more about natural products than natural products. Another aspect of the great healthcare gap. Of 1,556 new medicines approved in the past 30 years by the US FDA, only 1.3%. 1.3%, 20 of them, were for diseases prevalent in the developing world. Okay? So what's the message there? It's a very crude message, and I'm sorry to say the message, but what's the crude message there? When it comes to your diseases, you're on your own. That's the message. Right? In other words, the big pharmaceutical companies, who are the companies that have put all these new medicines together, they're not going to be helping you. You have to take care of yourself. That's a harsh comment. Right? However, look at it the positive way. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity. Right? To solve your problems. Pharmaceutical companies in the North will not be solving healthcare issues in the South. It's very simple. Planning and infrastructure development of future healthcare scenarios in the South are therefore critical. So some countries in the world that you would say would be in the south are addressing some of those issues. We're going to discuss that a little bit later on. A few years ago in Chemical Engineering News, there was a series of articles that came out on, it was the International Year of Chemistry, and I was asked to write an article on traditional medicines. And so I decided to write an article on plant medicines key to global health. And one of the aspects that I mentioned here was what paradigm shifts would be needed to improve the quality, availability, and sustainability of both traditional and non-traditional medicines. Okay? And that gets us into a different area that we're going to talk about. So, so that was published. This is now almost 6 years old. This was published. But it's available online if you want to read up. So discovery of new drugs for existing and new diseases, mostly for the developed world. Okay. There's a very limited effort, biological. However, development of traditional medicines as safe and effective agents, mostly for the less developed world, is very unfocused. In other words, and again, this is a belief that I have, why I say very unfocused, in the sense that, as I mentioned, there are countries where you would say that they are making an effort, top-down, what's called top-down, from the government down, to say, these are our priority diseases, and we're going to look at the traditional medicines that are important for those diseases, and we're going to try to turn those into locally useful drugs. Okay? And if we can take some of those and globalize them, then that's okay too. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to point out a few aspects of medicines and how they're regulated in the US. And I do it from the point of view of this is not the way to go. Okay? This is not a good model. This is not a model for most countries to adopt, because we've lost our way. And some people ask me sometimes, well, why don't you work in the United States on some of these issues? And my answer is because I want to keep my sanity. There are very powerful forces, economic forces, that operate in the United States with respect to drugs. And I'll explain them in a moment. It's kind of like 3 trains or 4 trains, all converging on you. And I don't want to be in the middle when all the trains hit. So, for example, there's prescription products. And prescription products are regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. There's a long registration process, and we'll see some examples of that in just a moment. Over-the-counter products. So aspirin, of course, is like an over-the-counter product, and all these various other drugs that are generally regarded as very, very safe, and you don't need a prescription for them, etc., etc. They're regulated by the FDA as well. Well, they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be. And I'll give you an example a little bit later on where we found one that was a total mess. Dietary supplements. And again, in other parts of the world, they're called phytotherapeuticals. So in Europe, they would be referred to as a phytotherapeutic. In the States, we call them dietary supplements. The kind of stuff that you would find in a health food store, or maybe a GNC, or sometimes in a pharmacy, saw palmetto and ginkgo and all these kind of things. In this case, the labeling is regulated, and the content is partly regulated. Okay? I'm going to talk a lot about that. And then, surprise, surprise, we have traditional medicines in the United States. Why? How? Because we have people from all over the world who maintain their own medicine systems, whether that's the Ayurvedic system, whether it's a Chinese system, whether it's a Mexican system, whether it's, from many countries in the world. I can go to a botanica, a very close to the University of Illinois, in the Mexican community, and I can go and buy the plant materials that I need, providing I know the, medicinal properties associated with them, but they're right there. Completely unregulated. Nobody is doing anything like that. I can go to the Vietnamese area, I can go to the Thai area in Chicago and do the same thing. So there's a traditional medicine system in the United States that nobody talks about. It's completely under the regulatory process. So DSHEA, this famous DSHEA Act, and again, I'm not going to go through that, but it defines dietary supplements, establishes a framework, blah, 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 blah. This is what it does. More important, from a patient perspective. Guess what? We're all patients. We're all patients. So one of the things that I'm going to talk a little bit about later on, and I'll mention it just now to give you an introduction, is that, okay, so I'm a basic scientist. That's how I was raised, as it were, scientifically. However, I've shifted. I've shifted to the other end of the spectrum, you might say. Maybe as you get old, you see the world in a different way. But I've shifted. I've shifted to ask the question, how does that benefit the patient? Right? Well, because my ideas now are patient-based and going back from the patient through the science, not going from the science through to the patient. There's a very important difference there. We're going to see that in a few examples. Very, very important that the science that we do translates to the patient. Otherwise, why are we doing it? Why are we doing healthcare science if it doesn't have an impact on improving healthcare at the patient level? Okay? More importantly, what it doesn't do, what dietary supplement act doesn't do. No chemical or biological standardization requirement. Okay? And one of the reasons for that is because if that was to come in as a requirement, it would put it into a different class of a drug. And the US FDA, and not really the US FDA, was under a lot of pressure from pharmaceutical manufacturers, the OTC generic manufacturers, the American Medical Association, to say, don't do this. All right? So anything that was required with respect to quality control, including issues relating to safety, efficacy, and consistency, were eliminated. So you may remember from the introduction that I gave about what we cover in this part of the lectures course was what's in the name. What's in the name? So, okay, so you're going to put a name on a box, right? You're going to put a name on a box, and that box is going to have some content. What is the content? What's in the name? You put ginkgo biloba on a box, right? You put it in the marketplace. Right? You put turmeric on a box. You put saw palmetto on a box. Right? But what's in it? What's in that name? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Because in terms of regulatory process in the United States, you can come up with a traditional medicine, you can put that into a box, you can tell the FDA that here's what you've done, you make no medical claims, but you put it on the market. That's healthcare? No, come on. Let's see this. Let's see it. Oh, no. Okay, so a few years ago, actually, it goes back more than a few years, but there should be a new survey coming out fairly soon. Based on the responses of 142 countries that did actually respond, of herbal medicine regulations. I don't like the term herbal medicine, but WHO uses it. The reason why I don't like it, because it diminishes, to me, it diminishes what's involved. When I think herbal, I think culinary. I think cooking. Right? I think, putting mint into something or putting some spice into something. Culinary. I think herbal. No. Plant-based medicine. Microbially based medicines. Right? We're dealing with powerful biological agents here. We're not dealing with something that's innocuous. So give it some respect. It's about respect. R-E-S-P-E-C-T. 37% of the states actually did have some regulations. They were usually regulated as OTCs, right? They were prescription products, right? But they were as OTCs. And most interestingly, they usually allowed healthcare claims, which of course to me is an anathema because I don't want healthcare claims unless there's evidence. And neither the WHO. Rarely, they're in a national pharmacopoeia. So those of you who are from pharmacy will know the significance of that. Right? The significance of having something that's in a pharmacopoeia, because a pharmacopoeia has some standards associated with it. Right? And standards imply that there's going to be some regulation involved. Often used the same good manufacturing practices as conventional medicines. Right, so this is what was found. However, in this survey, WHO omitted, unfortunately, to assess whether there were agricultural practices associated with those traditional medicines, or whether there are any efficacy requirements. So, whatever. So this is a little chart of what went on there, and I'm not going to go through this in any detail, but it's kind of delightfully embarrassing in the sense that lots of countries did provide information. Some countries, even major ones like Canada, had no policy. Philippines was one of those that had no policies at that particular point in time. United States, of course, in all its wisdom, didn't think that this applied to them. Didn't think that it applied to them, so they didn't bother to respond. Absolutely insulting. Absolutely insulting. I'm sorry. So, should we put this on heat? Is this part of the problem? See people freezing. We don't need to freeze. So, it's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, so we're once again, the United States is a bad actor. There's bad actors in lots of ways. Kyoto, on and on and on. Climate change. Okay, so about 64% of the world's population, roughly 4.5 billion people, use plants as a primary healthcare source. Now, the problem with this is there's no science behind it. I can tell you, because I know at least two of the people who were in the room when this figure was put together way back in 1984. It goes back to the Bulletin of World Health Organization. So Accarelli was the head of traditional medicine at the WHO at the time, and one of my bosses, Professor Farnsworth, was in this room. And he was a smoker, so I know very well that it was a smoke-filled room. And yet you will see in the literature that this is quoted time and time and time and time again as though it's a fact. It is not. It's a guesstimate. It's a guesstimate. And there are very few analyses of what is in fact a real number. Now it turns out, I worked with some people in Jamaica, and they just did a survey in Jamaica of the use of traditional medicines, and in fact it was pretty close, but it came out a little bit higher. It was about 70% therefore. Both urban, interestingly, both urban and rural. Okay? In other words, there wasn't a big difference between the traditional medicine use in the towns, capital Kingston or Montego Bay or wherever, and in the rural communities. This is an important number that needs to be established. So you need to establish it in this country, because it's a sustainability issue. It's a fundamental aspect of healthcare for a certain percentage of the population in the Philippines, right? Where are those plants going to come from? Where are they going to come from in the future? Particularly as your population continues to rise. Is that in fact a sustainable healthcare system? Now, I'm going to just briefly mention essential oils, because essential oils become an important part of this as well. They're used all over the place. And again, we're not going to go through this in any great detail, but obviously there are food products, there is some healthcare, there are aromatherapy. Do you, in pharmacy school, do you teach aromatherapy at all? Or not? Do you teach anything about essential oils? Yes? No? Okay. But clearly they're important in commerce, and they're important in various aspects of our lives. So let's look at medicinal plants and how they're used globally. It's roughly 500,000 tons that are shipped around the world. The estimate that I've seen, which I don't believe, is that about 30,000, 50,000 plant species involved. My guess is it's probably a lot less than that. My guess is it's probably around 20 to 25,000. However, the biggest issue is that these are 80%, 85% harvested non-sustainable. They're just wildcrafted. People just go out into the field and forest and so on and so forth and just pull the plants. Okay. And what's going on, of course, is that the people who are the plant collectors are going deeper and deeper and deeper into the forest and collect those plants, and those plants are disappearing. So as the plants disappear, so does your healthcare system. Right? You've lost access, and that's going on all over the world now. So from a public healthcare perspective, that's not sustainable. So I'll give you just one little story here. So a few years ago, I was in China, in a city called Tianjin, and I was visiting a company. I was working for the World Health Organization at the time. I was visiting a company there called Tasly. Tasly is an amazing company producing traditional medicine. Absolutely incredible. We'll see some photos a little bit later on. And I was talking to the director of research, and they're obviously very product-oriented and very high-quality product-oriented. And we were talking about sustainability and so on and so forth. And I said, well, how do you source your plant material? So he said, well, till a couple of years ago, and they have this one kind of big plant, focus plant, Salvia meteoriza, Dagshan. He said we were collecting it from 100 different places around China at various times of the year, because obviously it grows in different rates in different places. He said we had terrible problems because the chemistry of the plant kept changing. It was different from all these different locations. So he said, what we eventually ended up doing was we eventually ended up buying a huge plot of land and saying, this is where we're going to grow our salvia for our product, right? So that you had that level of consistency in the product. But that's a very rare instance. About 80% of the trade is between 12 countries. The major exporters are China, Hong Kong, India, and Mexico. Interestingly, in Mexico, I've just started to work down in Mexico with a group down there. So that's going to be interesting. The major importers are Hong Kong, obviously. There's a lot of manufacturing that goes on there. USA, a lot from India, as well as some other countries because of the dietary supplement industry. Japan, the basis of the Campo system of medicine in Japan is Chinese plants. Right, so even if you've got a Campo medicine like N65, all right, that's really a Chinese-based system of medicine. And again, we're not going to go into details of that. Germany imports a lot from the Baltic, the Balkan countries. Bulgaria is one of those. trading centres, blah, blah, blah. An analysis was done a couple of years ago where it indicated that around 9,000 medicinal plant species were in a threatened state. So to give you some kind of perspective on this. Give you a little bit of the global market changes, because the market is changing very rapidly. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but I want to mention this, that there's a big movement in South America between various countries looking for an effective regulatory model. One of the things that WHO has recommended is that countries work separately, that they work together as a group to develop common regulatory protocols. Because when you do that, then it promotes trade. So for example, as a manufacturer, if I decide that I want to meet the Philippine regulatory standards, I know that those standards hopefully will be the same in other countries in the region. All right? So that there's what's called harmonious regulatory system. China, of course, is a very different kettle of fish here, in the sense that, you know, what they're trying to do is literally to, and this is state policy. This has come from the state administration for traditional Chinese medicine since 2005. Their stated policy is globalization of demonstrated traditional Chinese medicinal products. So they're putting billions and billions of dollars every year. We're going to talk about that. India is now trying to catch up with Ayurvedic products. I'm working with some people, not actually in India, but in Sri Lanka, that are looking at that. And then, of course, there's e-commerce. There's this new country of e-commerce. All right? And who's regulating that? You know, you're online. Okay, bing, 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 I've just purchased something from Amazon or wherever. You know, what have I actually purchased? Where did it come from? What's in it? How do I know? What's the quality assurance? Where's my kind of government protection here about what is commercially available? Where does safety and efficacy and all that other good stuff fit into this business? So e-commerce at the moment of traditional medicine or natural products generally, you know, whether you're dealing even with vitamins and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Who's controlling that? How is that being controlled? So I got into this little topic here. I'm going to go for about 5 more minutes and I'm going to take a break. Again, these are all my photos from various places around the world. This is from Chile, this is from Marrakesh in Morocco, this is from Chile, this is from Santiago, this is from China, this is from Colombia. But you look at these products and you say, well, where do they keep on coming from? Where do they keep on coming from? And part of this globalization that's going on is that people are trying to create new markets. Right? So it's not just about the local market, it's about creating new markets. It's about taking products and selling them around the world. Right? So for example, one of the dramatic things that's happened, and I'm sure it's happened here, in the same way that it's happened in the United States and in Europe, is that you see products in the market, in a pharmacy or in a natural food store or in a GNC that are not local medicinal plants, right? They're coming from around the world. They may be based on the Indian system, ashwagandha or something like that that's there. They may be based on the Chinese system. They may be based on some European system. But there's this globalization. So again, you've got this issue of sourcing. And of course, it doesn't stop, in the sense that there's a discovery component there. There's a discovery component in the sense that people are looking for new traditional medicines to globalize, right, to make the money. Right? So it's not stopping just because you know that there's something that's already out there. No, there are new materials coming out, right, that are being turned into globalized traditional medicinal products. At the same time, what are the sustainable strategies for these market developments? One of the things I will tell you that I'm working on with this company in Sri Lanka is we're looking very carefully at how they source their material. Because clearly they are working in an area, they're adding Ayurvedic plants to certain products and making them effective. Doesn't matter the background to that. However, they're concerned about long-term sourcing. Right? They're saying, 5 years from now, are we still going to be able to have access to the plants that we need for our products? So it requires a new philosophical approach. I came to this conclusion about 6 or 7 years ago. We have to think differently about natural products and about the use of natural products in traditional medicine. Some of you may know the term, if you're in pharmacy, you may know the term pharmacognosy. And in many parts of the world, pharmacognosy is like the bad, I don't know, not bad person. They're like the lowest of the low in pharmacy. Many pharmacy schools in the United States, they closed their pharmacognosy departments, 20, 30 years ago, because they thought they were irrelevant. I wrote an article published before most of you were born, 1993. I published an article that said pharmacognosy was the high-tech pharmaceutical science. The high-tech pharmaceutical science. That is even more true today than it ever was. Much true. However, what I realized, after writing a lot on sustainable medicines, I realized there's another phase to all of this, right? There's a second phase to all of this. The second phase is, I'm a pharmacognosist, I'm a chemist, but moved into becoming a pharmacognosist. The part that's missing from pharmacognosy is the sustainability notion. If we go back to the early slides that I showed you, which said that as practitioners, whatever we're doing, wherever we're working in society, how do we make what we do more sustainable? That applies to me. That applies to me in what I'm doing. How am I making my area more sustainable? So I said to myself, okay, definition of pharmacognosy was the study of biologically active natural resources. It happens to be my definition. It's not everybody's, and you won't see it in the textbooks. But it's well published. I said, okay, let's make it sustainable. Let's make that a requirement. Let's make that part of the definition, and let's develop a new word. And the new word was eco, pharmacognosy. Right? And we're going to talk a little bit about that later on. Eco becomes both a philosophy of how to do things, but also practical of what you're going to do. What is it that you're going to change in your practices that you're thinking in a sustainable manner? I'm going to stop there. We'll start at this point. So let's take 5-10 minute, maybe let's try maybe 5 minutes. We'll take a 5-minute biological break. Okay? Relax, stretch, whatever. Okay? Thank you.
Yeah.